Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss that incident about the U.S. F-15 that intercepted an Iranian passenger plane over Syrian airspace. This plane was on its way from Tehran, seemingly to the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Nevertheless, when it was intercepted by the U.S., it was over Syrian airspace. Now, the U.S. said it was essentially carrying out a visual inspection of this plane to ensure it was not a threat to its military base at At-Tanf in Syria, that is. Nevertheless, the images that have come out from within the plane are quite disturbing, where you've had passengers screaming and clearly an altitude drop by the pilot of this plane to be able to maneuver out of the way, seemingly, of what could possibly also be two fighter jets, according to some reports, and according to some of the images that allege there may have been two fighter jets as well that came fairly close to the plane. Now, the U.S. says it followed all international standards. It was around 1,000 meters away from this plane, and when it was satisfied that this was a passenger plane, it did then stand down and move away. Nevertheless, what does this mean, especially, of course, within the context of continuing animosity between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States at this time, be it over Syria or be it over a whole host of other issues that we can probably list? Let's discuss all of that a bit further. Joining us from Washington, D.C. this morning is Reza Khanzadeh, who is a research fellow at the Sharif University think tank. He's also a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford. He works with Iranian organizations on human rights, public policy, foreign relations, and international business. Also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Richard E. Rubenstein, who is a professor at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. He's also the author of 9 books on how to resolve violent political and social conflicts. Richard and Reza, good morning to you both, and thank you for joining us. Richard, let me start with you. What do you make of this incident? Again, on the face of it, you have two completely different stories, right? But where do you think the truth lies?
Well, I think that this is we're entering a very dangerous time because of especially because of the American election. We have a president who has a number of very serious domestic problems, including his failure of leadership in connection with the coronavirus, and a very serious economic downturn, so that the sorts of issues that he wanted to run on in 2020 for re-election just simply don't exist, or they cut the other way. And in that sort of situation, he seems to be looking for some basis on which to defend his record as a leader, as a strong man, as a tough man. So we have a number of things going on, including the deployment of domestic troops to cities where there are protesters, like Portland, Oregon, going on right now. Yeah. Very controversial. And in the case of Iran, the conflict with Iran is continuing, and it's continuing to escalate. I mean, this is not an isolated incident. Yeah. We know, of course, about the assassination of General Soleimani, which took place not very long ago, which was a major kind of escalation. One of the things that Trump has done relatively well is to keep the United States out of wars and to avoid intervening in other places, in many cases, where he might have intervened. But this seems to be changing. He's much more inclined to intervene. I think his people understand they're responding to this kind of new kind of bellicosity on his part. And frankly, I simply don't believe the American story on this. I mean, it's only a week or so since the Iranian centrifuge center at the Natanz was blown up. Yeah. Almost certainly by Mossad with American approval.
Okay, so if you're allowing me, Richard, I just want to go to Reza with that, because you have very good points there. Reza, do you think that there are a lot of domestic politics that's coming into play with Donald Trump and his policies, or his current policies, the most current policies towards Iran and even towards the Middle East region, in the sense that he does need to show that he's a strong man, as Richard there mentioned, but then this could very well blow back, right? Where, I mean, at this point, it seems, at least from the outside, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the Iranians keep being pushed into a corner. At some point, they're bound to fight back.
Fly below the radar, if you will, in these recent weeks and months, particularly because of the election coming up, in the United States. And, it has been unofficial, but they've been kind of going towards this, kind of position where they don't want to be the aggressor or the initiator in some provocative types of moves against the U.S. to give more, flame to the fire, if you will, for Trump to come up with an excuse to either, attack or retaliate, and then possibly, potentially, to try to help Trump with his, reelection. And then also, if we do recall, many years ago during the Obama administration, Trump did accuse, President Obama at the time of, potentially wanting to go to war with Iran just to get reelected. And that has been used against Trump to say that he might even take that route. So even though, yes, Iran has been being pushed into this corner, I'm not, convinced yet that they might, actually come out and have some type of answer. Although, Zarif has come out and said that this was an act of terror. But as far as the extent of the Iranian government, what they've been saying thus far is that it would be investigated. And I believe that they have asked the Syrian and the Lebanese government to file, complaints, I think to the UN or just to the, to the courts to kind of investigate this.
Yeah. All right, let me bring you in, because, if I play devil's advocate for a moment, the American government, as you well know, Richard, says that Iran has disturbing connections, of course, to the Assad government in Syria, and that it supports the Assad government. And in fact, Mahan Air, the plane, this flight was operated by, that company has been sanctioned, of course, by the U.S., as you well know. The accusation is that it carries weapons for the likes of Hezbollah in Lebanon, possibly, and again for Bashar al-Assad in Syria and his army. Taking all of the above together, then, for the Americans to be suspicious of a Mahan airplane over Syrian airspace is not completely surprising, is it?
No, it's not necessary. I mean, there are several issues that your comment raises. One issue, of course, is the continuing American role in the Syrian conflict. The Syrian conflict is basically it is or should be over. And so for the Americans to say that they're protecting their base in Syria by, in this case, by putting passengers in a passenger plane at risk, also makes you ask, what are they doing with that base in Syria? Why especially if you have a president who says he wants to end the endless wars that America's been involved in? What's he doing there? At any rate, once you admit the legitimacy of the American base in Syria, and we're talking about 800 bases in more than 120 countries. That legitimizes a lot of military activity and protection of various outposts of empire. But at any rate, you're quite right. You could say that they are entitled to make sure that the plane was a passenger plane. Right. Did they have any reason to think that it wasn't a passenger plane? I don't know. Of course, we remember the passenger plane that was downed, years ago, and by the USS Vincennes. Perhaps they had a right to inspect the plane. I do wonder, though, what does it mean to inspect a plane to make sure that it's a passenger plane? Does that mean you have to fly close enough to it to see in the windows to see that there are passengers sitting in the windows? Or what? I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because if you have to get that close, you're going to be flying dangerously close and terrifying the pilot of that plane, terrifying people in the plane. Also, it seems that even if there was a right to inspect, that they did it in a negligent way. And when they say it's 1,000, they were 1,000 feet away. Imagine if you were flying in a passenger plane and a fighter appears 1,000 feet from you.
1,000 meters.
I mean,
no, it does look disturbing. It does look disturbing if we're completely, of course, those images of the fighter planes. Reza, I wonder, at this point, then, this continues, of course, right, this pattern of back and forth sort of things between the U.S. And Iran at this point. Will we continue to see this? Because, we've had these really mysterious, quote unquote, fires and explosions within Iran just recently, as Richard there had alluded to, Natanz and all that stuff. We can possibly make a fairly long list of all of those incidents as well. Do you think that we'll sort of continue with this pattern of more of a behind the scenes type Cold War type situation, or are we very much entering into a more risky scenario now?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do believe we could be entering a more risky situation. Beginning with these behind the scenes, attacks and events that you pointed out, primarily because of going back to to what Dr. Rubenstein said, that Trump entering this phase of trying to get reelected. Is, I believe, desperately searching for some type of news that can benefit him, because right now domestically he is essentially losing on all fronts, with the Black Lives Matters movements, and also with the COVID-19 and what's happening across the country. So this does have signs of potential escalation, between, well, I shouldn't say between the U.S. and Iran. I think it would be more, one-sided at the moment, with the U.S. Taking certain measures to try to, provoke Iran to strike back in a measure that then Trump could use as an excuse to go out. I don't want to say war, but to have some kind of military conflict, with Iran, especially with, Syria there, on their side. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if, Egypt is.
Okay, Reza, I do apologize. I'm going to have to come and stop you there. I do apologize, but the clock has gotten the best of us. We do sincerely, though, appreciate both Reza and Richard for their time today and for putting this into context for it, because it's important, too, also, as Richard there had started off with in his earlier answer, about putting the domestic politics of the U.S. Into the fore here as well, and bringing that into the discussion, because certainly with the elections happening at the end of this year, that does change the calculus for Donald Trump in how he wants to be seen going into these elections and even post-elections if he does win, of course. Does he really want a war, or is he just trying to push Iran, as Reza there mentioned, possibly into responding militarily somehow to all of the above incidents? The Iranians have at this point said that they want the Syrians and Lebanese to file official complaints. The Iranians will certainly carry out a proper investigation about what happened here. It's disturbing, though, as Richard there had said. How would one feel if you did see a fighter jet just 1,000 meters from your plane, the plane you were in, as just a civilian passenger? How would that make you feel if that was an adversarial fighter jet, that too, not your own country's fighter jet on top of that? So these are very disturbing times, certainly, and this just does not look good on the U.S. at this point in time. I'll be back with my final segment after this break.